Well, I'm an alcoholic and an addict, and I guess you could say especially a crack addict. My name is Steve. And I'm from Florence, South Carolina, and I speak redneck, and I hope y'all can understand what I'm saying. And I know that we got at least one guy here from Arkansas, and if you need him, he can translate a little bit, okay? But I want to tell you about an alcoholic who walked into a library and he said, "Give me 2 double cheeseburgers and a Coke." Everybody in the library was kind of amazed that a drunk would walk in there and say something like that. And a few seconds later, he said, "I said, give me 2 double cheeseburgers and a Coke." And the librarian said, "Sir, shh, you're in a library." He said, "Excuse me, give me 2 double cheeseburgers and a Coke." It's quite an honor to be able to come up here and speak at the premier alcoholism and drug addiction treatment facility in the world. I'm here to tell you, and be here with people like y'all, because y'all are my kind of people. I don't feel comfortable too much around earth folks, but I sure feel comfortable around folks like y'all, And I guess it's my job to share a little bit tonight about what it was like for me and what happened and what it's like for now. And I'm going to try to be brief in my drunkalog so that we can get into what happened and what it's like. And I know that it seems to me that every time I was ever in a treatment center, I was not doing too good and in pretty bad shape, and I didn't have too much hope. And one of the great blessings of the program of sobriety is that I have hope today. So I'll tell you that I was born in Portland, Maine, didn't live there for very long, and that by the time I reached the 3rd grade, I had not done any dope yet, but I needed some. Because I was extremely thin-skinned and super sensitive and full of fear, and I didn't like myself too much, and I couldn't watch football because every time they huddled up, I thought they were talking about me. And I tell you, I wasn't much, but I was all I thought about. And I had this incessant need to be accepted and liked, and it seemed like the more I tried, the less I felt like I fit in. And I just walked around with a big, giant, enormous, gaping hole inside of me the size of God. And an amazing spiritual thing happened when I was about 11 years old. I was in private school, and I was in the 6th grade. I was 6'1". I weighed 135 pounds, and we went to go school shopping for the duds that you got to get when you go to private school. So we went to where you get some really good, high-quality clothing at Kmart. And I got me a Levi's plaid snap shirt. Y'all remember them Levi's plaid snap shirts, I had an Adam's apple that stuck out to about right here, and I had these big old collars, and of course I got me a pair of Wrangler jeans, and man, I felt like $1 million, and I popped into that school, and they all had polo shirts and boondocker shoes and duckhead pants and Izod underwear. I mean, they had it all, boy. And I didn't have much, and boy, I felt like a turd in a punch bowl. Can you imagine what that would feel like? I know that I did, and I got in there, and I tried to fit in, and I didn't feel like I fit in, and I was a very shy kid, and I internalized everything, and I used to go home and cry, and I often share one of my very first, my first experience with alcohol. There was another little outcast kid, and his dad was a United States Senator from Raleigh, and he says, "Hey man, we're going to go to Raleigh for the weekend, but my dad ain't going to be there, but don't tell your parents that." And I said, "Well, I won't," And so we went over there, and an incredible, magical thing took place. I took a drink of alcohol for the very first time, and that giant gaping hole closed. I suddenly felt whole. And my entire life has been a search for wholeness. That's what I've always looked for. And I found a chemical wholeness in alcohol and drugs. I remember the first time I smoked pot. It was a marvelous experience, and we were walking, and my legs were doing like that, and we walked through the drive-thru at McDonald's, and we thought that was the funniest thing in the world, and it was great, and we were eating caramel sundaes, and food tastes so good when you're high on pot. I swear to God it does. It's good. And it was just, so can you imagine how offended I was when somebody suggested that maybe that was a problem? It wasn't a problem. I'm going to tell you right now, I don't have an alcohol and drug problem. I've got a spiritual problem with an alcohol and drug solution. And I found that chemical wholeness, and I spent the better part of my adult life searching for that. So anyway, I'll tell you about my first drinking experience. And oh, another thing is I had to lie a lot to pretend to be something that I wasn't. Because I felt like if you really knew the truth about me, that I wasn't going to be accepted. So what I had to do was I had to make everything larger and bigger than it really was. And I lived in that prison for most of my life until I found this program. So a couple of guys from school got together and they said, "Hey Steve, we got some Jack Daniels." And I said, "You do?" He said, "Yeah, you ever drunk it?" I said, "Yeah." Of course I hadn't, you know. I'd been drinking beer and wine coolers and stuff like that up until that point. And we got out and I said, "What are we going to do?" They said, "We're going camping." So we went out there to this creek. There was about 4 of us, and we had the tents and a couple of cars. And we got down there in the afternoon, late afternoon, and they broke out the Jack Daniels. Well, I didn't know that you're supposed to drink it sparingly. I drank it like you're supposed to drink beer. You know, guzzle it down and pretend like you're cool and all that good stuff. And so I remember slurping down that Jack Daniels, and I came to the next morning with the birds chirping. You know what that's like? And the tent was all over me. And I'm rolling trying to find my way out the tent. And I finally make my way out of the tent, and there's one buddy of mine that's awake, and he's sitting on a cooler, not looking too happy. And I was trying to move my arm, but I couldn't because there was something bad wrong with my arm. You know, I'd hurt myself somehow. But I needed something to drink. I needed some water. And there was a cooler that had some water in it, and I said, "I'm going to get me some of that water." And I was trying to lift that thing up. I couldn't because of my arm. I said, "Billy, man, can you help me get some of this water?" And he got up like this, and he held that thing up, and I got me a drink. And finally he says, "Do you know what you did last night?" I said, "Yeah." "What'd I do?" He said, "You tried to kill us all with a machete." He said, "You had superhuman strength. It took all 4 of us to hold you down. My God, man." And it went downhill from there. I got slapped into treatment the very first time. I was age 17. My family had a problem with my drinking and drugging. And I didn't want to go, but they gave me the family ultimatum, one of them intervention deals, you know. Talk about resentment against that stranger in the room, boy. Vent everything towards him, you know. "It's your fault. I ain't never seen you before, but it's your damn fault. I can tell you that." Anyway, so they said, "You go to treatment or you get kicked out of the house and out of the family, and we don't love you no more," and all that kind of stuff. They didn't say that, but that's how I felt, you know. So they get me in treatment, and of course I'm scared to death, but I'm not going to let anybody know that because I'm phony. I have to pretend to be cool and tough, and I can't be like, you know, show any fear or anything like that. So I remember one of my first experiences, I'd never been exposed to any recovery, never been in any AA, never been in any CA or any NA. All I know is they brought me in this room with a bunch of folks that looked kind of rough to me and a lot older than me. And the chairs were in a circle, which I thought was somewhat odd. And I sat down, and they had a chair, a funny looking chair, in the center of the circle. And that looked suspect to me because I imagined that there was a possibility I'm probably going to end up sitting in that thing sometime. So I'm sitting there, and they start going around the room, and there's a couple of counselors in there, and one guy says, "Well, my name's Jim. I'm alcoholic." Everybody goes, "Hi, Jim." I thought, man, they like him. Golly, he's popular. I need to get to know that guy. And then the next guy says, "Well, my name's Frank. I'm alcoholic." Everybody said, "Hi, Frank." I said, "Well, they like him too." Then they got to this next guy, and he says, "Well, my name's Jerome, and I don't believe I'm no alcoholic." Oh, my God. Next thing you know, he's sitting in the little chair, and they're going, "You're in denial." And he's crying, and I'm crying. I got sweat pouring down my forehead. I don't know what's going on. And it gets around to me, and they said, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm Steve, and you can bet your ass I'm alcoholic." I didn't have a clue what it meant to be alcoholic. But I knew I was one. You know, and I heard a couple of things in that treatment center. It was great. You know, I I'm not going to go into too much detail about that, but I got kicked out on my 27th day. They gave me the break the first time they caught me smoking pot in there. I'm not going to go into that no more. But anyway, they kicked me out. But I remember they said 90 meetings in 90 days. Or did they say 90 treatment centers in 9 years? One of those they said. Well, the seed had been planted. The gig was up. My family knew that alcoholism and drug addiction was a disease. I didn't know that. And boy, I spent the next 12 years bouncing in and out of this thing in an ugly kind of way. I joined the Marines. I did all kinds of geographical stuff. I joined the United States Marine Corps because that was going to get me sober. I don't recommend that treatment program. It's kind of rough. Somewhere about 1991, I realized that this thing's a problem and I needed some help, and I went to a treatment program in Nashville, Tennessee, which was based on the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they take you through the first 5 steps while you're there, and I did that as best I could, and when I left, man, I felt great. I felt like $1 million. And they said, you need to get into AA when you get back, so I did. I went back to my home community, and I got into my AA group, and I started going to 3 meetings a day. You know, but there was a lot missing. One was any type of continued program of action, any type of willingness to take direction, any type of honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, which is the 3 essentials of recovery, these 3 things that you have to have if you're going to stay sober. And you know, I tried staying sober off the fellowship. There's a big difference between the fellowship of whatever 12-step program you're going to go to. And if I happen to say Alcoholics Anonymous, that's because I got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. But if you are trying to stay sober on the fellowship and not the program, there's a big difference in the two, see? So I was staying sober off the fellowship, and pretty soon when you're doing that, you're not treating the spiritual condition, and you start getting sick. And I started getting sick spiritually in my group. And what happens to me when I get spiritually sick is I start treating my illness in other ways. You see, I've got the only illness known to mankind that will not go untreated. This disease will not go untreated. We'll either treat it with drugs and alcohol, or we'll treat it with some maladaptive relationship, or we'll treat it with a 357 Magnum. But it will not go untreated, I can promise you. So I began to treat my illness in other ways. AA guy meets AA girl on AA campus. Man, that's some spiritual stuff right there. You know how it is. Your eyes meet from across the room, and then you look away. Then you look back, and then you look away again. And then a couple meetings later, you find that she's looking again, and you go, oh, it feels so good, doesn't it? Quite wonderful. And then you graduate to, let's study the big book together. Just you and I. Because I really feel God has put us together. No question about it. How else could we meet at this wonderful psychiatric institution? It's so wonderful. And for you ladies, when you hear this, you know it's going south from there. I love you, but don't tell your sponsor. And believe me, I'm not making light of a tragic sickness like that and how that destroys and hurts people, I'm here to tell you. Because what takes place in some spiritual sickness like that is severe harms to others. And when we do things that cause harms to others, we bring about spiritual consequences on ourselves that you can't run from and you can't hide from. And most of us can't stay sober through them. So that's the reality. I remember how it felt when people around AA were going, you don't need to get in no new relationship for at least a year. I'm like, a year? My God! Keep in mind, I just got done doing 5 years in the penitentiary. Without. So I've heard. And so anyway, I started treating my illness some other ways, and guess what happened after 2 years of being sober? I got drunk. And it was amazing how it happened, because for a few weeks before I got drunk, I noticed I was just cruising around Cracktown, just to check them out, see how they were doing down there. You know, I hadn't seen them in a while. Yeah, getting introduced to that was rough because, a guy told me, he says, well, if you do some of this, you can drink a lot longer, He neglected to tell me that it was going to make me incredibly paranoid. My God, we used to call that partying. There I was in my hot water heater room, partying. And then I try to, be normal on it. You can't be normal. My wife, she knew for sure when I was doing it, probably because I looked like this. And so I'd roll home and I'd try to do everything I could to act normal, and she said, well, let's watch some TV, honey. I said, okay. She'd be watching TV, I'd be watching Doorknob. Man, talk about x-ray vision. You can stare till your muscles in your eyes hurt. And you got to unplug the refrigerator because it's making too much noise. Guys talking about being paranoid and peeking out the windows. It got so bad for me, I'd have to go outside and peek in. And there's three types of poor. There's poor, and then there's broke, and then there's crack broke. Whoo, boy, you talk about broke, man. My pockets, man, they were awful. I'd walk around with my hand in my pocket, doing this craziness. Sick stuff, man, sick stuff. But you know what? In my mind, I was having fun. Isn't that crazy? There ain't nothing fun about that, is there? And it ain't never going to get no better because the illness is progressive. And if you've begun that paranoid, psychotic episode and you're using the old days of when you used to be able to do it and just want to talk, where it was so fun, they're over. So bouncing in and out of more treatments, and then of course I had to start stealing, and I went to prison, and then I got out and my wife left me and I went to prison again, and the next time they really stuck it to me, and I spent many years in a maximum security penitentiary. And I had some absolute extreme desire to never do this again, because I used to write letters home from prison and I'd say, if I ever make parole and get out of here, I am never going to do this again. I'm going to AA, I'm going to do something. There just ain't no way. Just out of curiosity, has anyone in this room ever sincerely said to themselves, I ain't never doing this shit again ever? All the hands. Okay, so I made parole early. And I come out in my shower shoes because I'd traded my Reeboks for some cigarettes. And it was wintertime. So my dad picks me up. I hit the street with this high resolve of getting a job, trying to find my wife and kids, trying to do what I had to do to get them back, and I had these big plans, big resolve. I wasn't trying to con anyone. I wasn't playing any games. I was serious as I could be. And in 2 weeks, I was drinking and drugging again. And I ended up in my mom's kitchen crying. And she said, son, you have so much to lose. You're on parole for 10 years. You're an habitual violent offender. Why are you doing this? And the most honest answer I could give her was that I didn't know. So the last 9 months of my using I was homeless on the streets of Florence. I just can't even tell you the pain that I caused my babies. My daughter and my son had no Christmases because Dad was so sick with addiction. I had so much guilt and so much shame, and I hated myself, and I hated you, and I hated life. And I was one miserable cat, living on the streets of Florence, justifying it, saying, well, it's not too bad because I'm a Marine. I can handle this. This is fine. Hell, I sleep in the woods all the time when I was in the Marines. Living in a kudzu patch. I weighed 135 pounds. I had a big boil on my forehead. I was unemployed and unemployable. I had $2,600 worth of bad checks out there. And I couldn't get the idea of drinking and drugging out of my head. What do you think? Do I qualify to be here? So I got an incredible butt whipping because I used to try to steal drugs. I don't recommend stealing drugs and then going back down there the next night. I went down there and they give me a real whipping, son. And I was all skinny, and 235 is my normal weight, so imagine what I look like at 135. And They whipped my butt, and I ended up in the hospital with a concussion, and I knew I didn't want to live like this anymore. And I knew I couldn't go to AA anymore because I'd burned bridges at AA. Hell, I owed everybody at AA money. I owed everybody in Florence County at least $20. They used to call me the $20 man. I can borrow $20. How you doing? Good. You got $20? And so I had borrowed $10 from this guy at my group. His name was Gene. And my father picked me up from the hospital, and we were talking about what am I going to do. And I told him, there's no way I can get sober in Florence. You've got to help me get out of Florence, please. And he started to pull into this Exxon station where this guy Gene worked that loaned me the $10. I said, don't pull in here, man. I owe this guy $10, man. Not only did I not have the $10 to pay him, I could not see of any way of me ever having $10 to pay him. And my dad, being the kind of guy he is, he pulled right in there anyway. So I laid down in the back seat in the floorboard, and I could hear them out there talking as they were pumping gas. And all of a sudden the back door opened. And it was Gene. And he went, what are you doing? So I told him the truth. I said, I've dropped something. I'm trying to find it. And God spoke through that man at that moment. He said, Steve, forget about the $10. I want you to come back to AA one more time. And I went to a meeting that day, and I ran into a guy named Mike P. And Mike P. recognized me from years before being in and out of the program. And he said, son, can you tell me what it means to be powerless over your addiction? And I gave him the only answer I knew. I said, yeah, Mike, once I start, man, I can't stop. He said, really? Then why do you start? And at that moment, I began to have identification with the hopeless illness of the mind. You see, as a result of the illness of my body, once I put a chemical in me, a phenomenon of craving develops, and I can't stop. But because of the hopeless illness of the mind, I can't not start. Because I have a mind that's strangely insane. I have a mind that absolutely will not recall the certain consequences of what is going to happen to me when I drink or drug. And I'm going to tell you something about this hopeless condition of mind and body that I suffer from. You can't think it away. You can't learn your lesson it away. It can't be reasoned with or bargained with. It ain't going away. Ever. If you got it. I'm not saying you do. I'm saying I do. And at that moment, when I began to really understand the true dimension of what it means to be powerless over my addiction, step 2 began to infiltrate my life. I knew that I needed God if I was going to live. I knew that I needed a power greater than myself, which presented some problems for me because I wasn't a religious guy. And I didn't know what to do. And he says the spirituality of the program is very simple, Steve. If you understand that your real problem is lack of power and not alcohol and drugs, because I thought I had an alcohol and drug problem. Well, if you got an alcohol and drug problem, the solution's easy, just don't do them. What I have is a lack of power problem. I lack the power at certain times, because of the illness of the mind, to keep away from the first one. That's why I drink and drug when I say I'm never going to do it again. Just out of curiosity, how many people in this room have drank or drugged despite saying you would never do it again? Boom, that's the illness of the mind. That ain't going away. Just having education about that ain't going to take it away. You can be the most proficient expert in the scientific knowledge about the illness of the mind, and if you're like me, it ain't going to matter. You're going to drink and drug again. Unless you have a spiritual awakening. And I said, well, how am I going to have that? He says, we got a pathway that's already been blazed for you. And if you're ready, in step 3, we'll make a decision. And I said, what am I making a decision to do? He says, you're making a decision to search for the needed power. That's a very simple step 3 to ponder right now. Step 1 is a statement of the problem, lack of power. Step 2 is a statement of the solution. We need power. Step 3 is nothing more than a decision to search for the power through a program of action, which is steps 4 through 9. That's what brings it about. Those are the transformation steps. That's what brings about a spiritual change. That's what creates wholeness and peace and happiness in our lives. But see, that's not enough. Because 1, 2, and 3 prepare us, 4 through 9 transform us, but they don't keep us transformed. 10, 11, and 12 keeps us transformed. And by practicing those simple principles in my daily life, well, I'm in my 10th year of continuous sobriety. Now, I am not an alumni of the Hazelden primary program. However, I am an alumni of the Renewal Center. 5 years ago, I was suffering from what some of us call the symptoms of untreated alcoholism. I had become complacent in my program, and I had began to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on my laurels. And to paraphrase the text, it says it is easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels. We're headed for trouble if we do, for alcohol is a subtle foe. We are not cured of alcoholism. What we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. So I had let up on that process, and I became very spiritually sick again in sobriety. And I didn't know what the problem was. I was going to 3 meetings a day. But let me tell you something. Meetings are wonderful, and I have to attend them, and they go along with my sobriety program. But meetings alone are not going to treat the disease of addiction. So my sponsor knew a man who knew a guy who knew about the Renewal Center. And he says, Steve, we decided you're going up to Minnesota. I said, I ain't going to Minnesota. It's cold up there. They said, well, you can get a new sponsor. He was serious. Man, that bothered me. So, I'll tell you how sick I was. I had a 3rd edition big book that was all underlined, you know, because I wanted everybody to see that thing underlined. I walk into the meeting, yeah, I'm a big book man. I'm ready to kill myself, but I'm big book man. My sponsor says, buy a 4th edition big book and take it out there. I said, well, it's not underlined. They won't think I'm studying the book. That's sick, ain't it? I'm suicidal, dying of untreated alcoholism, but I'm worried about what y'all think about my underlined big book. So I came on out here, and the loving people of the Hazelden Renewal Center, man, they showed me some real unconditional love. They helped me to understand that I was just suffering from the basic symptoms of untreated addiction, and helped me to get on the spiritual path with some enrichment and some education and a deeper look at the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And they brought that book alive for me. And they helped me to understand that it's just not something, you know, it's a book of instructions. If you want to know, you know, somewhere somebody hung the 12 steps up on the wall, but they didn't hang the instructions for them up there with them. They're found in the first 103 pages of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So every year since then, I come back for a retreat once a year, so that I can just sort of get centered and get honest and get real with some people that I know I'm never going to see again. Boy, I can get honest with a stranger. Man, let me tell you something. Whew. And if I should happen to see him the next day, I'm like, how you doing? But yeah, this is an awesome place. And if you're sitting here and you're like me, understand that there is hope, that there is a power that will deliver you from the hopeless obsession to drink and drug. And he does it in an amazing and profound way. My life is so full today. By the way, remember that wife and kids I lost? God give them back to me. I told her, I said, I'll be wearing that wedding ring up there because, you know, my wife's been through a lot. I've put her through a lot and caused her a lot of pain and caused my family a lot of pain. So I owe a debt that I can never repay. So part of my living amends is to be as loving and as kind as I can to my family, and understand that they become very sick when they live with us too. So I have to be, you know, love and tolerance of others is our code. So I have to practice that in my family. And if I don't, then my spirituality is lopsided. So how does it work? I tell you, at the root of every recovery is identification with the real problem. The real problem is not alcohol and drugs. It's lack of power. Our inability to keep away from the first one because of the hopeless illness of the mind and the body. And we treat the spiritual condition, which is how we're sick at the level of the spirit, you know. These unhealthy manifestations of self when they crop up. And we got a program of action to deal with that. And it might sound all foreign and everything to you, but just hang in there. And know that if there's not any person on the face of the earth that loves you, Steve loves you. I love each and every one of you. And I'm going to close with a story about a farmer. And this story goes along with a lot about how we end up here. and a lot about what gets us into recovery. And I think you'll enjoy it. But it's a story about a farmer who is in his fields, and he's praising God for the soil and for his crops. And he looks up and he sees his neighbor coming up over the hill. And he hollers over and says, "Neighbor," he says, "where are you headed?" Neighbor says, "I'm going in town to buy me a cow." Farmer says, "Don't you mean you're going in town to buy you a cow, Lord willing?" Man stopped his tractor. He said, "Dadgummit, the Lord ain't got nothing to do with it. Now I got the money in my pocket. The man in town's got the cow. I'm going in town to buy me a cow." Farmer said, "Okay." So he put it on around the corner, around the hill, and through the wood line. And 2 robbers jumped out, pulled him off of his tractor, and whipped him half to death and dog-eared his pockets. Y'all ever had your pockets dog-eared? A few minutes later, farmer's in his field praising God for his crops. Looks up and sees his neighbor coming, headed the opposite direction. Hollers over to him and says, "Hey, neighbor, where are you headed?" He says, "Going home, Lord willing." Thank y'all.